Hey there, and welcome to a special video game edition of Vassals of Kingsgrave. In this episode, we'll be discussing and spoiling the PlayStation 3 game The Last of Us. My name's Duncan, aka Valkyrist on the forums, and with me is Katie,
Lady Griffin on the forums.
Peter,
Known as Shellfish on the forums.
and Zach.
Hey everybody, also known as Alias in the podcast of Ice and Fire forums.
Alright, so thanks for joining me, guys. Just to give listeners some context, The Last of Us is a narrative-driven third-person adventure game which blends together elements of the survival horror and zombie apocalypse genres. The game has been praised for its high production values, nuanced character development, and challenging subject matter. It received a record 42 perfect scores from gaming publications and currently holds a 95 out of 100 rating on Metacritic. Just some quotes. Edge magazine called it the most riveting and emotionally resonant story-driven epic of this console generation, while Eurogamer wrote that it was an elegy for a dying world and a beacon of hope for its medium. So I guess my first question for you guys is, do you agree or disagree with this overwhelming praise? Maybe give a lemon cake rating and maybe name your favorite moment in the game. So I guess, Katie, do you want to start?
Sure, I don't agree.
You disagree.
I disagree. I mean, I think it's a fine game. I enjoyed the entire time I was in it. I was impressed and surprised at many points. But I guess maybe being as familiar with I am with zombies and pop culture and other zombie video games and zombie movies and short stories, maybe I was overly familiar with a lot of the tropes in order to be thoroughly impressed. To me, the best part of the game, or the most interesting part of the game, was the ending. And if it hadn't been for the ending, I'm not sure I would have cared for the game at all. As far as lemon cake ratings, I'd probably give it a solid 4.5, just for sheer production value and competent mechanics and some of the better parts of the story. And if I had to pick my favorite part, it was probably when you're in Bill's town and you step in the trap and you're hanging upside down, because
Right.
I had never seen anything like that done in a video game, and that was, to me, really innovative and interesting.
Oh, definitely, that's cool. Peter, do you want to list your lemon cake rating and your favorite moment?
Yeah, it was definitely a 5 out of 5 for me, and kind of fell in love with the game almost immediately after getting it. So I think my favorite moment is everything after in the university after Joel falls down on that rusty spike when Ellie has to lead him through to the horse, and playing as Ellie in winter is also awesome because at the university I was just getting comfortable with playing as Joel. I had a flamethrower and a machete, and I was pretty confident that I could take on anything that was thrown at me, and then the game sort of just pulls the rug out from under me and puts me in Ellie's shoes and just gives me pretty much a bow and a knife, and on top of that, the most intensive combat sequence in the game, probably the winter infected fight, was also really cool. So probably that, yeah.
Definitely. And Zach?
I do have to echo Katie's thoughts on the fact that the game is definitely built on a lot of obvious cliches, and I definitely had that feeling when I played it myself. And also, it's something that Kirk Hamilton of Kotaku mentions a lot in his review, which I recommend anyone read if they want to have a good impression of what the game is like before they play it. But despite that, I think that the reason the game succeeds is, despite the cliches, you just get such a keen sense of these really unique and fun characters, and you get so involved in their stories despite the fact that it's a story you've probably seen before. And it really, that's where the game finds its unique elements. And besides that, the gameplay, I actually have a lot of praise for it. For a AAA game that is obviously conforming to that shooter, that survival shooter environment that so many like to do. It does, like you say, that's a great example of you being hung upside down. It's a great example of gameplay elements that are distinct and different and help to add a lot of variety. And also, the best part of the gameplay for me is if you play on harder difficulties, you actually have to be very careful about conserving your ammo, and you have to be very calculated with the way you walk through the environments, and that was really a great way of introducing tension by means of the gameplay rather than the plot. So with all that in mind, I would definitely rate it 4.9 out of 5. There's this small bit I don't like that I will probably mention later, but I think that as a game, it's excellent, it's brilliant. It's not necessarily terribly innovative, but I think that within the marketplace of games where they kind of have to conform to this shooter style to succeed, that it's very successful. And to give my favorite moment, it would probably be during the very beginning of the spring portion of the game, I think the spring, where you're making your way to the hospital and you encounter Joel and Ellie encounter these giraffes that are crazing in the middle of the city, and it's just a brilliant, beautiful, and emotional moment that just caught me. So that would be my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I do see what you're talking about with the sort of cliched zombie apocalypse structure, especially in this day and age where we have things like The Walking Dead. I mean, the last 10 years have just been zombie apocalypse sort of media. But I don't know, I sort of do see it as a way of using that premise, which is a cliche, but kind of unpacking it a bit more. I mean, you're not really set in the actual zombie outbreak. It is very much 20 years afterwards, and it's more about the sort of decay and decline of civilization and Joel working through his grief. So I think, you know, by maybe movie standards, it is a little cliched, but I think by video game standards, the characterization is surprisingly sort of deep and nuanced, especially with Ellie and Joel. I guess I'd give it 5 out of 5. I mean, you know, even with a bit of disparity of opinion, we're still giving it 4.5 to 5 out of 5. So I think it is still a very generally positive. We're all generally positive of the game. I think for me, the most amazing section is that whole winter sequence. I mean, that just really goes to some dark, complex places that I haven't seen in video games. And as Peter says, it's this great juxtaposition of like feeling so strong as Joel and ferocious, and feeling so weak and vulnerable as Ellie, and switching back and forth between the two creates such an awesome dynamic. Because, you know, when you're Ellie, you have nothing, you have no resources, no items, you're physically weaker, you have to depend on sort of flight and stealth. But then when you switch back to Joel, you know, when he wakes up from consciousness, he is so strong, and you just sort of run at your opponents, and they just basically flee before you. It's a great dynamic.
Yeah, that's great. That's like a bear waking from the winter sleep or something like, and all the rats scatter.
It's so satisfying. You almost feel like you're the monster, and they're the ones that have to be afraid.
Yeah, Joe goes all Dark Knight on them.
Yeah.
Did you actually feel weak as Ellie? Because that was maybe I was trying to burn through the game, so I was playing it on normal. But I felt like when I turned into Ellie in that winter section, when they come after you in the town, it's like she was an entire Green Beret battalion just taking dudes out. I think.
No, I felt really sort of vulnerable because you start to. It's a great way of doing it. I mean, I think at the end of each act break, you know, summer, winter, spring, whatever, you do feel this real sort of jarring cut, and the next sequence is like. So you see, sorry to rephrase that, you see Joel possibly die at the end of autumn or fall, and you don't know if he's still alive, and you just start as Ellie. And for a long while I thought I was going to be Ellie for the rest of the game. So I was building up this sort of artillery, this arsenal, collecting items. But then you get captured, and you get all that stripped away from you. So once you get released from David, you have nothing. You don't even have a knife, and you don't have any compass. It's just this snowstorm. There's enemies all around you. So I don't know, maybe on normal you do feel a bit stronger, but on the harder difficulties you do feel incredibly vulnerable, and there's just no compass on where to go.
Yeah, she's certainly not helpless. She's not helpless, but it is definitely a step down from all the equipment you've gathered as Joel and kind of built up this character that you're very reliant upon, and it is definitely jarring to get that all taken away and have to work with lesser means, especially after you escape prison and you basically don't have anything.
I agree that you're very vulnerable in the town when you're just sort of wandering around in a blizzard, but when you're fighting the infected in the resort earlier on in winter, I think, as Katie said, you get almost unlimited ammo from David, and you have that hunting rifle. It's pretty awesome. I think Ellie is probably a better shot than Joel, at least. I don't really base that on anything, but it just feels
at the end of the day, you're the one aiming, so it's hard to judge.
Well, yeah, but maybe the rifle is better or something.
Yeah, that rifle was great. I wish we got to keep it.
You definitely do have some of the hardest sequences when you're trapped with David. You kind of have to fight your way out of that room that is extremely difficult.
That was the most infuriating part of the game. I was about to break my controller in half when you just have that little kitchen knife or shiv or whatever Ellie has, and it's like a 3-round sequence where eventually he starts creeping after you, and I was like, oh, fuck this, I can't catch him.
Yeah, that was. It all culminates in that kind of boss battle with David, where he's creeping around the things, and he's very much like Joel in the way he moves and the way he stealths around and hunts his opponent. So it's a great dynamic between you playing as Joel this entire game, and then you having to fight this very kind of creepy, mutated version of Joel. and who sort of, when you start off the winter sequence, he's a bit of a father figure. You can see him as this kind of replacement figure for Joel, and you go through all of these kind of trust exercises with him in fighting the infected, to the point where you actually trust him as a character and as a player, but then it all just goes horribly wrong. And I think that whole winter sequence is really impressive, and especially culminating in that moment where Ellie just goes nuts on David. It's a really powerful moment, and the music just swells, and afterwards she's just not the same. So really effective storytelling, in my opinion.
Look, what was the plan? Let's say that we deliver you to the Fireflies. What then?
Marlene, she said that they have their own little quarantine zone with doctors there still trying to find a cure.
Yeah, we've heard that before, huh, Tess?
And that whatever happened to me is the key to finding a vaccine.
Oh, Jesus.
It's what she said.
Oh, I'm sure she did.
Hey, fuck you, man. I didn't ask for this.
Me neither. Tess, what the hell are we doing here?
What if it's true?
I can't...
What if, Joel? I mean, we've come this far. Let's just finish it.
Do I need to remind you what is out there?
I get it.
It is this setting of the zombie apocalypse, but I think in a way it's more about the character arcs of these two characters, sort of growing and dealing with grief and dealing with loss, and kind of finding something to sort of fight for in each other. So, I mean, I guess I'm framing the first part of the podcast talking a bit more about plot, but we can go back and forth between gameplay and all those other elements. But I guess one of my questions is, how did you guys respond to these character arcs of Joel and Ellie and the relationship that kind of develops between them and between you, the player, over the sort of course of the 20 hours of gameplay?
I guess that was one thing that I was impressed with the game, is that it is deliberately uninterested in anything that has to do with the actual apocalypse. I mean, other than as an ambient setting, it's not a community building exercise like in other zombie games. It's not interested really. I mean, the cure is kind of the ticking clock and the drive at hand, but it's not really about finding a cure. It's more just about Joel and Ellie. And yeah. I think you can kind of tell from the very beginning what Joel's arc is going to be. It's going to be a redemption arc and him learning to care for this girl. And as for Ellie, it's a little more ambiguous at the end how she's changed, other than becoming harder. I'm not sure that she was necessarily soft at the beginning, but I think that last shot with her on the camera where she just says okay is really interesting to me, and up to, I think, a little bit of interpretation whether or not she believes him, whether or not she's going to continue to believe in him. And I was wondering maybe what you guys thought about that last conversation, because I think that's the summation of both of their arcs.
I think that you make a really good point about it not really taking time to kind of explore the broad scope, and I really like that about the game, that the lens of the story is very, very focused and very, very zoomed in on these two characters. And I think that that is really comes out in the best way, not even in the cutscenes, but in those moments when you're kind of exploring towns and you're just having these ambient conversations with Ellie as you go through and you're playing the game. I think that really helps to develop the two characters, and it's a really great way of just really focusing in on their relationship. I guess if we want to talk about the ending, my impression of it was that she did not believe him, but she was just going to accept it because she knew that they needed to. If they believed it, it would be too much for their relationship, and they just had to pretend it didn't exist. And that's how I interpreted her saying okay there, that she was like, all right, we're going to try to forget this
as well.
I mean, they've come to need each other in a way. I mean, I think that's part of the purpose is playing as Ellie, is that she becomes his caretaker for a good chunk of the game after he gets hurt. And at the end, I think it's a good shift where at the beginning, she is, in the first section, she's the only character who's talking, and Joel is kind of grunting and dismissing her. And by the end, he's lucky if he can get a few words out of her in that last section. And I think he's become emotionally dependent on her. And so at the end, he's almost more emotionally vulnerable than her. And he's like, I need you to, he's not saying it, but he needs her to believe what he's saying so that he can keep her with him. And I thought that was terrific from a character standpoint, to see that character emotionally just soften and weaken.
Exactly, yeah. They both kind of need this lie. They kind of, it's reliant upon both of them. They need it to survive because they need each other. it was great. It was really emotional, and a lot of people say the ending wasn't necessarily fulfilling or that it didn't tie up everything or those things. But I think it was successful because it made me feel something. It made me feel like, wow, these two characters have been through so much, and this is the result at this point. They have a long way to go. They might not make it, but I totally felt that moment in the relationship really well.
Yeah, it is. Oh, sorry, Katie.
I was just gonna say, there's so many big contradictory feelings going on, and that's what made the ending so impressive for me. Is that, in essence, you could see Joel as a complete monster in that final sequence. I mean,
Yeah.
he's sticking completely out for himself and for Ellie too. But if you're talking in terms of like the greater good, like the greater good goes completely out the window. He's just, it becomes completely about his personal redemption and the guilt he feels about his daughter.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to that final decision to ultimately save Ellie and doom humanity, I guess. I mean, it is, as you say, this very psychologically unstable attempt to, I don't know, rewrite his daughter's death or sort of play out this fantasy in which he's strong enough now and ferocious enough now to defeat all the soldiers and save his little girl. But I also think there is, I mean, at that point, the player cares so much about Ellie, and it speaks to the quality of the writing that we are kind of, or at least I was totally with Joel. I wanted to defeat these fireflies, and yeah, totally, and I wanted to save Ellie because, I mean, it is this question of, I mean, it's kind of the question that you get in Book 3 of A Song of Ice and Fire. What is the life of one little girl worth against the future of the human race? And to Joel, it's everything. It's we've seen the sort of remnants of the human race, and for the most part, they're horrible, desperate kind of animals that just devour each other. And Ellie, apart from a few characters like like Tess and what's his brother's name? Tommy, yeah. Apart from a few people, most of them are worth less than Ellie. Tell you, like she is. I don't know. I see more promise in her as like the future of humanity than any of the sort of warring factions like the Hunters and the Fireflies that sort of pretend to be the saviors of humanity, but ultimately just want power and control. Whereas Ellie has at least this glint of kind of human empathy and moral decency within her. So I think taking her to Tommy's Dam. Tommy's Dam to me holds a far greater hope for humanity than the Fireflies. They've got decent people living there. They've got knowledge of agriculture and hydrology. They've got kids. They're trying to insulate themselves and reform society as this little microcosm. So, I mean, to me, there is a kind of, I don't know, philosophical rationale behind sort of saving Ellie and defeating the Fireflies in that sense. So I was kind of with it from that point of view.
That's interesting because for me, I was very much opposed to the decision to kill the doctors, and I thought that was a really interesting decision.
I murdered them all.
The developer, right? You can't choose. You have to kill them. You do not have the option. So you're sitting there, and the game doesn't. Right, the game doesn't take it away from you. You have to do it. You have to do it. It's not a cutscene, so it's a really interesting choice, and I actually really like it. And beyond that. I think that it was a very interesting idea in a video game to cast an anti-hero like Joel, who really is not a good person at all. He's just an old killer trying to survive in this very brutal world, and to kind of experience the game from his shoes and to have to make decisions like that is a really interesting choice that I really think succeeded in the same way that a show like Breaking Bad succeeds in casting an anti-hero as your main protagonist, so to speak. Yeah.
And you are so sort of empathetic, I guess, of him because you see his backstory and you are playing from him for so long that you kind of see him as not a hero, but as you say, an anti-hero. But by the end, and you sort of get glints of what he's done in the past, which are seemingly pretty horrible. But by the end, as you say, he is this monstrous sort of beast. And you could read his savior of Ellie as this very kind of pathetic way of reliving his daughter's death, and he's holding on to her purely because he needs her. She's his emotional crux, and that's why he does it. So I think it's cool that it's sort of left ambiguous, and there's a lot of different ways to read it. And I don't necessarily see it as a sort of redemption storyline for Joel. I think he is sort of depicted as a pretty despicable person by the end, but it's more about him just, I guess, accepting his daughter's death. I mean, he sort of denies it for a long time. He refuses to talk about it or think about it. He refuses to take the photograph from Tommy. but by the end he's slowly sort of accepted her death, I guess. And the sort of the kind of okay line from Ellie is this recognition that, as Joel says, they need someone, they need a reason to live. And I guess their reason to live, even if it is a lie, is each other. Like her and him, them together, that's how they survive this world. That's how they keep going in this world and don't just give up or just sort of give in to their kind of survivalist, brutal impulses like a lot of the other characters.
I also want to say that the choice to make Joel such a monster, as you say, is a great way of not creating dissonance or suspension of disbelief in a video game where you have to kill a lot of people, as opposed to Uncharted. Uncharted, where you're this dashing rogue who is going around killing thousands of people. It's hard to swallow, as opposed to this game where you can definitely believe it more. And I think that was a one great decision that served that purpose.
Yeah, I think it shows a sort of maturity on Naughty Dog's part, or the developer Naughty Dog, where it is this, in Uncharted, you are just massacring people, but it's done with this sort of smirk and this smile and these kind of witty catchphrases. But with Joel, with The Last of Us, it is this much more measured approach. Yes, he is massacring people and in a horribly violent way, but it is shown to be this really disturbing individual that is doing these
deliciously, horribly violent.
Yeah, and it's confronting the player with their own actions, which I think is really bold.
You wait here. Now, the girl. Is she alive?
What girl? I don't know no girl. Fuck!
Focus right here, right here. I'll pop your goddamn knee off. The girl.
She's alive. She's David's newest pet.
Where?
In the town.
Speaking a bit about the beginning, how great is that for a tone setter at the beginning of the game?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The beginning is really, really great. Yeah.
Walking through the house.
Sorry.
Oh, go on.
I can't think of another game where we've seen that, where we've been in the sort of the thrust of the zombie apocalypse, and then to jump like 20 years ahead. It's a great transition. Yeah.
It's a gutsy choice too to make that jump, but I just want to say that about the beginning, it's really interesting that you have this character that has literally very little agency over the situation she's in, because she's just a little girl, obviously, in her house experiencing this horrible situation. And beyond the fact that I just love the setting or the setup for a zombie apocalypse, like that first moment of pure chaos, I think it's a really great interactive experience where you just feel the helplessness that she's experiencing, and you get to have that whole thing fleshed out. It was just very creepy, scary, and hard to deal with, and I think it works.
Yeah, and it's done very sort of efficiently. It takes about a couple of minutes, but you can walk through the house and you can read an article in the newspaper, and you can go into Joel's room and see the television, and you see this explosion on the television, and then in the distance you see the explosion. So it's a really great way of setting things up. Any more on Joel and Ellie, or Joel and Ellie rather, in the characterizations?
Ellie, she reminds me a bit. The whole time I was playing, I was reminded of a character in mechanic-wise of Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite. Anyone played that?
No, I played the first one.
I am familiar with it. I've yet to play it. It's been on my list for ages, obviously, one of the bigger games of this year. But yeah, I'm familiar with the character.
You know, the device of having a companion who assists rather than being escorted for the full duration of the game, and also the mechanic of her walking around and having this ambient dialogue on what she sees. It's very much it's used a lot in BioShock Infinite. I thought that was interesting.
What's interesting in both games, they make a point not to make either character a burden on you as the player. In BioShock Infinite, they do it by having Elizabeth provide you with ammo and weapons and those sort of things. Whereas in The Last of Us, Ellie cannot be seen by enemies when she is walking around. So when the clunky AI is in a bad spot, it doesn't screw you over by having her be spotted and having all the enemies come down on you. That can be a little bit jarring when you see her jumping around and no one noticing her from a plot perspective. But I think it was a necessary evil to avoid that issue of, like you say, having to escort someone that is constantly causing trouble for you as a player.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a bit of a progression. She does start as a bit of someone you have to protect and constantly hide, but she does gradually become a fighter, or she helps you by throwing bottles, and then eventually she upgrades the guns, and by the winter sequence, she is her own sort of agent.
Yeah, I love that Ellie actually helps you out and bails you out of trouble now and again. And like, if somebody is sneaking up on you, like enemy is flanking or trying to get the sneak up on you, that she can like yell out and say, "Watch out behind you," and that actually helps sometimes. And she'll give you ammo and medkits and everything. That's cool.
Yeah, she's one of the few sort of helper characters in games that didn't kind of irritate me or get in my way. She doesn't get in your way, but she also sort of helps you at times as well, which is great.
I think that Neil Druckmann, the creative director of the game, said that they had the Echo game as a inspiration for this, that sort of escort mission type thing. I haven't played the game myself, but I've heard that it sort of has the same kind of thing.
Eco is the ultimate escort game because that whole game is centered around you holding somebody's hand and literally holding someone's hand and leading them around traps and obstacles. It's come a long way since throwing Ashley in dumpsters in Resident Evil 4. So.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, I mean, not just games, but I think you can see quite a few. I mean, it borrows heavily from other movies and novels like The Children of Men and The Road, where you do have these figures that you have to escort from one point to another. I mean, in The Road, it's the man's son, and in Children of Men, it's this woman who is like holds the key to the future of humanity, like Ellie. And things like Walking Dead, I think you can see a few allusions to that, or any sort of work of, zombie apocalypse fiction.
Yeah, I believe that the game was very deliberately plotted as an homage to Children of Men and The Road. Neil Druckmann, again, I think wanted to pay his respects to those amazing stories, and he succeeded. I think I have a lot of respect for him as a writer to achieve these sort of things in video games that he has. Of course, he also was creative director for Uncharted 2, another one of my favorite games that is very successful in what it tries to do. To speak a little bit on Ellie, I think that this is an obvious point, but I think it's interesting that in this game they chose to focus on the sort of father-daughter pseudo relationship as opposed to the romantic one that you often see in these sort of games. And I thought it was a really bold and very good choice that worked for this game. The emotional tones were all played out nicely, and I really felt the relationship a lot more than I tend to in some other games that do fall back on that typical like romantic style of doing things.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that might wrap up. The plot discussion. Was there any sort of themes or ideas or commentary in the game you guys picked up on or wanted to talk a bit about?
The thing is, I don't really interpret the game as overly preachy in any sense. I don't think it's trying to really impart any specific messages. I think it's really just trying to be representative of these two characters trying to survive in this brutal reality that they're experiencing. So, well, I think there are obvious themes that you can attempt to draw from it. I don't think that was the intention.
Yeah, I think, as you say, it's the zombie outbreak is much more in the background, and it has all the same sort of cliche narrative themes as you see in other zombie outbreak fictions, but it is far more concerned with these two characters and their relationship and their kind of emotional transformations throughout the game.
Yeah, I think that I read somewhere in an interview or something that the characters of Joel and Ellie came before anything else in the development process. So they, even before the setting or anything like that, so they got to kind of build from that. So, and I also think that unlike some other post-apocalyptic fiction, it sort of manages to be light and, well, not light action, but it's not terribly bleak like something like The Road or something like that. It has that human element that sort of keeps you engaged. So I really like that.
I mean, there's some pretty dark shit that happens in this
Yeah.
game, but I didn't
well, maybe I'm just jaded.
The thing is about like Ellie and Joel is they're so inured to it. Like at no point does Ellie really freak out when she sees something horrible. Joel is pretty numb. It's not like The Walking Dead from Telltale where it's like every time you find a dead child in a room, it's like we have to pause for 5 minutes and swallow this and
Yeah.
think about the feelings. It's like they just kind of it's all kind of in the background and they pass through it as just this is the way the world works now.
Yeah, I think numb is the best word to describe it. I think that conversation between Ellie and that teenage boy Sam is kind of an interesting, I don't know, arc for the story because he sort of asked the question that maybe has come up in other zombie works: is that person still inside these zombies? Which is a really terrifying thought. And I guess and Ellie's kind of response is no, they're not in there. They're gone. They might look like humans, but they're not. And I kind of read that as a bit of a need to sort of dehumanize your enemies, which is something that a lot of the groups of people in this game do. Obviously, the hunters have taken up that philosophy. So I sort of saw that as a bit of a unique aspect to it in terms of zombie fiction.
Yeah, the dehumanizing even extends beyond the zombies, like you say, to other humans. And it's kind of, I agree with you that it is kind of a necessary element to this brutal world that these people are experiencing. And definitely numb. Definitely numb is the right way to describe it, especially as a reflective trait for the characters themselves, all of them really, from this experience. I think it's interesting that you mentioned Sam, because one of the things that I find interesting in all these dystopian future fantasies is how kids who grew up without the past experience sort of perceive the world. Like that's one of the things I also find interesting about the show Revolution, even though it's not the best show, obviously. But it's just one of those interesting elements of future dystopia that I really like to key in on. And it was nice to get another look at that beyond just Ellie.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the greatest, well, not greatest, but really interesting moments is in the university when Ellie asked Joel what these places were for, and he says basically that it's for young people to figure out what they want to do with their lives, and that's sort of so foreign to Ellie. She's like, she hears the words but doesn't really understand. It's like what they wanted to do with their lives, like you can actually decide what to do, or she's like baffled.
Yeah,
it's a really nice moment.
It's this great kind of perceiving our world, I suppose, from the perspective of people who live afterwards. So it is very much this theme of the decline of civilization and people looking back, I guess, and not having those choices and having to basically rejoin the food chain, I guess, and survive rather than live, and kind of set aside things like morality and conscience in sort of the necessity of survival. The last point I would make would be I thought it was I kind of like the look of the infected and their kind of really erratic movements. I saw it as a bit analogous to the zombies in Half-Life 2, where they're kind of really sort of screaming and really in pain, but having to do these things. I mean, going back to Sam's conversation, it is like these people are trapped in these bodies and being forced to do things, horrible things that they don't want to do, which is a really scary thought. And I guess the player kind of feels that in Joel, where you're having to do these horrible things that you don't want to do, like kill the doctors, but you have to, I guess. You're being forced to by the game or by the situation.
It was definitely interesting to have the virus be like this fungal infection as opposed to the typical sort of like blood thing they do. And the fact that it's airborne adds a whole nother level of tension. The fact that they have to wear these gas masks to avoid the spores and so forth, and I really like that element. And I think that like the fact that some of these zombies are so powerful that they can just kill you in one shot, the clickers that you have to avoid and take out with such care, was a really good idea. I don't think this kind of game with this sort of slow deliberateness would have been the same if you had a lot of like super fast running zombies at you constantly. I think the way that you kind of have to navigate things very tactically is a lot better than that.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting that they use this real life thing, cordyceps, that occurs in nature, and it's I mean, it's almost like nature, I don't know, fighting back against humans and kind of ridding humans, which is almost like the virus on nature, because it's quite interesting walking around this world and seeing the decay of these great human cities, and seeing humans just kind of wiping each other out and being wiped out by the the infection. But nature itself is actually doing quite well.
Yeah.
You've got deer and giraffes and all of these animals just walking around. You've got all these cities being reclaimed by the natural environment, which is quite this brilliant juxtaposition of the horror that humanity is dealing with and this beautiful flourishing of nature.
I will say
definitely.
that from an ecological perspective, the decay you see would probably be like it's about 20 years after the fall of man. Those cities would be much they would be jungles by now. But from
Well,
a
there
design,
are humans still doing some effort to maintain them. There are certain settlements that are trying to.
I mean, the level of
Yeah.
decay is probably what about 2 to 3 years would look like. But from a design perspective, they can't have you walking through forests. There has to be the impact of seeing the buildings that are still recognizable in some sense.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
that's why I like that bit with the giraffe so much. I think that it adds another layer of complexity to this idea of if trying to survive is the right thing, if nature has a right to reassert itself, and it's kind of an interesting bit there.
Yeah, and
I guess that's in the title.
That's right. Yeah, and you get the feeling
Though, despite the fact that it's called The Last of Us, there are a lot of humans running around, so I don't know. I found the title a little bit inappropriate for the situation, but I mean, it makes sense, I guess.
I mean, I sort of saw it as going back to the ending and Joel's decision to save Ellie. I kind of saw that as The Last of Us, this more philosophical sense of what being human is, because, if you think of humans in this biological sense, there are plenty of humans still around. There are plenty of, I think that's kind of where the philosophy of the Firefly, the player disagrees with them, because yes, the Fireflies might be able to produce a vaccine from Ellie and save humanity in like a species sense or a biological sense, but that's almost not enough. Like, humans have just become horrible at this point. They care only about violence and power and control and surviving. And that can't just be what being human is about. Like, I think there's more humanity in Ellie, this sense of empathy and this sense of moral decency, than in any of the Fireflies or the Hunters. So I mean, I guess the really nihilistic question the game is asking is humanity, the humanity that we see throughout the game, even worth saving? And I think the sort of the sense of this, the Last of Us, the sort of the human being in the philosophical sense or the empathetic sense, is more about saving Ellie and sort of reconceiving humanity in something like Tommy's Dam, rather than trying to resurrect the humanity of the past in the sense of the Fireflies and the Hunters, because that world is done with. That sense of humanity has just become something horrible and animalistic. So we sort of got to look to someone like Ellie for our savior, I guess.
It's very much like The Road, in that novel there's this constant dialogue between the father and the son about how we have to carry the fire. And the son doesn't quite understand that, but it's for the father it's kind of a way to keep hope and keep them going, but it's this larger discussion about we have to be better than the people around us. We can't let what's good in us be debased and die out. And it's a constant struggle, especially for the father, to keep fire for him going, and he puts all of his faith in the son that he's going to be the one to carry the goodness that's left in the world.
Definitely, yeah. And I think Joel recognizes that fire in Ellie, and he doesn't have it in himself. I mean, he's lost. He's given into his survivalist impulses and done horrible, horrible things and lost his connection to the human being. But Ellie still has it, and he just does everything to protect that, I guess. So that's why I kind of saw the rationality in and the justification in his decision to save Ellie, because, as you say, you need to protect the fire of the good guys and the goodness of people.
What about Tommy then? Do you think he's kind of redeemed himself by starting this sort of new?
Yeah, definitely. I think Tommy is a very good person, yeah.
I think that's like the reason that Tommy and Joel don't get along, because, I mean, Joel's just become this, like, as you say, monster, and there's this great moment when Ellie and Joel are leaving Tommy's town on the horses, and Tommy says to Joel that there's a place for you here, and Joel just sort of shrugs it off and leaves. So I think that's sort of that there's no place for him in that sort of new rebuilding world kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like he's recognized that he's lost something within himself, and he can't, he's beyond hope, but at least he can use his kind of ferocity to protect those where there is a hope. And I guess that's what was so great about the winter sequence, where Ellie is in this position where she can so easily be corrupted by her survivalist impulses, and you see at the end her completely give in to this really violent expression of that when she tries to kill David with the knife. I mean, I love the relationship between David and Ellie. It's this really great sort of dynamic that only Ellie experiences completely outside of Joel. And she does kind of lose something at the end of the winter sequence, and she is very changed after that moment in summer. As you say, Joel is much more talkative, but Ellie is really changed by that experience. But I think she does still have that sense of humanity inside her. It's been tainted, I guess.
This is just an ancillary comment, but obviously we're a podcast that is an offshoot of a podcast that podcasts on A Song of Ice and Fire. Sorry, bad language. And the Game of Thrones show. And one of the things I noticed in the past season of Game of Thrones, this is a minor spoiler, is there's a moment that is very reminiscent of Ellie that I was like, that immediately harked back to me. That harked that moment back to me. I was like, I thought of The Last of Us, and I thought that it was interesting that there was a similar thing that happened there. I'm trying not to be spoiler.
What was the moment, or you don't want to say?
Should I just say it?
Go ahead.
For Game of Thrones.
All right. It's the moment where Arya tricks the guy with the coin, makes it fall on the ground, and then she just starts stabbing him over and over again. And I saw it as like this release of violent aggression that I immediately thought of Ellie, and I thought it was a really nice sort of comparison.
As many, yeah, that's a good point. We can have as many references to A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones as we want.
Right.
But yeah, I think you can almost see a bit of the Hound in Joel, I guess, this very broken man, and his relationship with Arya, or maybe a little bit of Sansa as well, seeing this kind of pure thing that he has to protect.
Easy. Holy shit. Are we gonna help him?
Put your seatbelt on, Ellie.
What about the guy?
Oh, he ain't even hurt.
Not good!
The darkness is falling, the sky has turned gray, a hound in the distance is starting to bay.
So yeah, I mean, how did you guys find the mechanics of the game? I mean, it is divided very much between, third-person shooting, cover systems, some sort of light puzzles, exploration, scavenging. I mean, how did that all work for you?
I will say I was a little annoyed with it at first, but it very slowly eased into it. That first encounter, the very first clicker you run into, I was so angry until I finally understood. Okay, I can distract it with bricks and bottles and whatnot, because I was just getting my face turned. I must have memorized that animation where Joel gets his face bitten off. But other than that, I like that there is a definite tension when you're trying to craft things in real time, squatting down and trying to make a shiv really quickly, or reloading the flamethrower, which seems to take forever. And I think they definitely made it so that I think the removal of like an item screen, so you don't have to pause it and whatnot, I think it was definitely welcome to me. And I think you said this earlier, Zach, is like there's a definite tension in trying to creep around and figure out how
conserve
best to
ammo.
Yeah, conserve ammo.
There's a limit. There's definitely a limit, because you have to be smart about it. It's not like other games where there's just endless sources available to you.
Yeah, I think it very much picks up on that survival horror style of gameplay that you see in stuff like Resident Evil, where every bullet has to be savored, and if you can, you're going to have to use stealth or sneak attacks or melee attacks before you start sort of using up your bullets, especially on survival mode. I don't know if you guys have done that, but it's really, really tough. You have to, I mean, a lot of times you'll just run out of bullets, and you'll have to sneak by people, or use melee or choke them from behind. It really forces you to treat every enemy differently, and really sort of map out each environment and use it best way possible. I mean, I love the sort of the maps the game puts together, and the way you have to figure out, where the funnel points are, where the choke points are, trying to not get trapped. Always have like a retreat place so you can sort of fall back to, ways to kind of, I guess, funnel enemies into a single spot, trying to get the high ground and then jump down once you get overwhelmed. Because it is, I mean, there's sort of two types of enemies, and depending on who you face, really matters. You've got the infected, who are just these mindless creatures that will just attack you in mobs. So that's its own kind of challenge. But then you have the humans, who won't mob you, but they'll use this kind of strategy where they'll communicate to each other and try to outflank you and approach you from different spots and flush you out with Molotovs and then to shoot you. So it's a great, I love that it forces you to strategize and use the environment to the best of your ability.
Fire is your best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kill it with
Bricks.
fire.
Bricks are good.
Molotovs.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed the scavenging aspect of it, because I'm that kind of gamer who just has to poke through every chest and crate and see what's in there, and so this sort of borderline OCD habit sort of has a justification in the game, because...
Though this game, I think, is a lot more successful in that bit than other games like Assassin's Creed or Tomb Raider, or pretty much any game developed by a studio in Montreal for some reason, where they have these elements where you have to collect all these different things, and it's kind of like percentage-based, where it like encourages you to find them all. And that can be very annoying, that you have this sort of implicit obligation to find all this stuff, where in this game, you don't really have to find everything. It's not like part of some like achievement or percentage. I guess it could be if you wanted to go for that, but it's not as obvious as it is in those games. And these things that you find, obviously ammo or equipment that helps you, or like pieces of story back, like information, like notes from people and things, are really just nice, and they're not distracting or frustrating.
Yeah, I really liked. I mean, I wanted to sort of scavenge, one, because you need to collect items for future engagements, but also because it's fun to find out all these little notes and uncover the sort of backstory to this world piece by piece. I loved going through the sewers and learning about that little community that lived down there, Ish, and what became of him.
I think my favorite note has to be when you find Bill's partner in that house and you find his suicide note in the back room. Like, dear Bill, I hated your guts.
Well, that's how you feel. Well, fuck you too, Frank. Fucking idiot. You ready to go?
Bill as a character is an interesting comparison to the main two, because he obviously makes that point that a partner only slows you down. Whereas Joel and Ellie are kind of wholly reliant on their partnership to survive.
I did find myself laughing at sort of the video gamey cues that you're about to enter a combat section, because the game will either have Joel fall off something to separate him from Ellie, like, oh dear, we're going to run into some clickers here in a moment, or you'll walk into an open space and it's like, oh, look at all this chest-high cover.
Well, that's an issue with a lot of games, unfortunately. But it's much worse in games like Mass Effect or Tomb Raider, where you literally see these environments that look like they were designed for the best possible combat scenario. And it's less obvious in The Last of Us, I think.
There's also the suspicious video game generosity trope when you're about to enter a heavy fight, you suddenly find ammo everywhere. So like, oh, well, what am I going to need these for? Like the segment you mentioned earlier, Katie, that one where you're hanging from the roof, you find like revolver ammo before that.
Yeah, if you come to a room with lots of ammo, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking to the waist-high cover, I mean, yeah, you're totally right. You do get that immediate tenseness when you come to those areas expecting a fight. But I think it is sort of coded into the environment a bit more subtly, rather than just having walls. It is kind of more environmental aspects like cars and things like that.
You can definitely see the progression from a game like Uncharted, where it was very explicit. When you're going to enter those combat rooms, like you literally walk into this massive room and there's boxes literally scattered around that you can just see. All right, I have to make my way through this. It definitely is an improvement.
I think if I have a criticism of the game, it is that maybe there could have been a bit more enemy sort of variance. I mean, we sort of see three enemies. We see the human soldiers who are a bit more strategic, the infected runners who are much more wild and will mob you, and the clickers who I really liked because they can't see, so you have to sneak around, use sort of distractions to lure them away, and especially early in the game, you have to be really careful about them and use these kind of tactics because they're very powerful and they will kill you in one shot, so you have to keep away from them. So I think that creates a really great tension. But by the end of the Pittsburgh sequence, which is about halfway through the game, you've pretty much encountered every enemy and every kind of battle scenario that you're going to. So I would have liked maybe a few more variations of the infected, to spice things up a bit. It I think it still works. Maybe some boss battles. I mean, I'm a big fan of boss battles. It might not have been as logical in a game like this, but yeah, it might have been fun.
What you're saying, I did feel like that there was I kept expecting there to be more variants on the infected, but I will say that when that bloater first staggers out of the closet at the gym, I think I might have facepalmed because it felt so wrong for this type of game. It felt like a Resident Evil moment, and I was like, oh, come on. Are we going to run into, clickers with long tongues now that are going to drag me down the hall or something?
Oh, I would have loved that.
Well, I think there's a balance to be struck. I agree with you that I don't think it suits this game to have a laundry list of enemies where you have to know how to do this specific thing against this enemy when you encounter it. I don't think it would have worked that well. I think it works in a game like Left 4 Dead or even Resident Evil, where you do have to be aware of these different types and know what you have to do. But I feel like it would have taken away. It would have felt too gameplay for me for a game that is very grounded in its storytelling.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. It is. I can't imagine Marlene being in a mecha suit and having to take her down or something. It is much more about.
That would be amazing. That should be the deal.
Get away from her, you bitch!
It is more about, the story and the characters and dealing. I mean, it's more about the things you learn and dealing with sort of controlling space and dealing with environments to take down enemies, rather than culminating all of your weapons into a single sort of mighty enemy.
Speaking of hilariously inappropriate bits with how they could have done things, there is this video on YouTube where they did a fake alternate ending for the game where they show this sequence of them doing the mocap for it, where the director told the woman who plays Marlene to sing it as if it were a musical. Joel ad-lib, Troy Baker, who voices Joel, ad-lib picked up on it, and it's absolutely hilarious, so we should definitely link.
Oh, good. I'll link to that in the show notes. That sounds funny.
What am I feeling? So much confusion. I've got a man in my arms and a girl with a gun to my head. There she is on the table. Is she alive? Is she
Look
dead?
at her, Joe. Look at her. You can still do the right thing, Joe.
No.
Yeah, definitely. There's one type of enemy that I actually sort of missed on the first time. I didn't realize that they were a different type of infected. They only appear in two parts of the game, in the basement of the hotel in Pittsburgh and in the sewers. They're called stalkers. They're these sort of runners, little upgraded runners. They're sort of very fast and attack fast and move very erratically, and I didn't even realize that they were a different type of infected the first time I was playing, but they were definitely sort of just jump from behind, and scariest part of the game, definitely those two, and felt like they should have used them more maybe.
Yeah, I do remember those parts in the game. As you say, it's only a couple of times, but they are sort of this advanced runner where they use a bit of strategy. They'll try and run around a stage to catch you from behind. So it is pretty scary. Yeah. I just wish they'd used it a bit more. So I mean, there's not much to say, I guess, on the kind of visual or the musical elements. I think it's all pretty top notch. The game is gorgeous. Sorry.
A thing to mention is that about the music is that it's not overdone. It's not overly dramatic in a way that a game like Mass Effect might be, where it's very orchestral and very swelling. Where in this game it's very subdued intentionally to achieve like an emotional element without it distracting you from the from the fact that you're trying to live into this game. You're trying to insert yourself, and when you have those moments, they're kind of jarring a little bit because they don't legitimately represent good pacing. And I think that is a good thing to mention about the soundtrack here. Of course, composed by I'm gonna mess up this name, Gustavo Santaolalla. I can't say it. It's very weird, but yeah, very good. Definitely.
Yeah, I really like the music. It's as you say, it's not exciting and heart pumping. It's much more atmospheric and kind of melancholic almost. You sort of move through these big shells of human cities, and yeah, the music is quite sad at times. I love the theme to the game at the beginning, and I love that moment at the end of the winter sequence where the music just kind of swells over their voices. It's really I really like that. It was a moving piece. Yeah.
Ellie! Stop! Stop!
Fucking touch me!
It's okay. It's me. It's me. It's me. Look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
No.
It's okay.
I sort of noticed it had sort of a Western flair maybe, and the whole game has sort of feels a little bit like a Western really. I mean, the guns all have wood in them, and sort of, I guess the sort of like the sheriff and the deputy moving around the frontier or something like that. But
there's definitely a twang to a lot of the music, and the end theme especially. It took me a while at the beginning to, because it starts in Texas, right? It took me a while. It
starts in Boston. Oh, you mean the...
No, yeah.
Right, yeah, it starts in Texas, but then moves to Boston after the... Yeah.
It took me a while to figure out where we were geographically, because from there they just... I guess you go from Pittsburgh, and then from Pittsburgh to...
Wyoming.
Colorado, and then Salt Lake City. I mean, yeah. I guess it's supposed to be more a reflection of Joel. He's you can hear it in his voice. He has definitely a East Texan accent.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, just to talk about the voice acting, I really liked the vocal performances of the characters, and the facial animations. I think were really effective. I think they've definitely bridged that sort of uncanny valley that some other games have struggled with, like L.A. Noire and what was the other one? The French game. God, about the serial killer.
Heavy Rain?
Yeah, Heavy Rain. Yeah, I didn't quite see that the humanity in those sort of faces, but I thought it was really effective in The Last of Us.
Definitely a lot of respect for the VA here. Of course, Troy Baker, who also voices Booker DeWitt in Bioshock Infinite, and is now voicing the Joker in place of Mark Hamill in the new Batman game. And he is definitely showing his range with that. He's a great voice actor for sure. And Ashley Johnson, I think, for Ellie. And a lot of people actually thought that Ellie was played by Ellen Page, who is in fact the main sort of model for a new release game, Beyond Two Souls, which was also made by the same guy who made Heavy Rain, like you mentioned. And so there was a kind of little controversy there.
The characters definitely seem to be modeled after Ellen Page, and I think she was a bit annoyed about that because she had her own game. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Also, props to Nolan North, who played David, who I thought gave a really, really creepy performance.
Also, Steve Bloom is Steve Bloom is over every video game, but I thought it a little ridiculous. It's like every background man I could recognize. Steve Bloom.
Yeah, I did think some of the dialogue of the sort of nameless henchman could have been a bit better. I thought it was generally fine, but it did come off as a bit silly at times.
I used to feel that way about
humanized them a little bit.
With background characters, I always felt like they were her voice for some reason.
Yeah, as you say, Peter, it does humanize them a little bit in points where I think in the where was Ellie? During the winter sequence in that village she was at, Lakeside or whatever it was. She hears like some women trying to get the children into safety, and she's kind of a bit shocked by that there could be women and children in this camp. that where the men do such horrible things, but ultimately they're doing it to feed their families and their loved ones. So yeah, and it's sort of interesting to see the fear in a lot of the enemy's eyes when they're confronted by Joel, when he grabs them from behind and holds a knife to their throat and they're begging for mercy. So
I will say it's very satisfying once you get that axe.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah.
It's like all my empathy just went out the window because this is so satisfying.
Yeah, definitely. Very effective melee weapon.
Yeah, I definitely love the axe and the machete. Yeah.
And he starts taping like scissors and things onto it. Very brutal, but that's satisfying kill, yeah.
I also really love the bow. I mean, how it could only have like 9 arrows with you. In most games you have like unlimited arrows or like 100 or something, 20. And realistically a quiver can only like hold maybe 10 arrows, and I really like that aspect, and that when you used it stealthily you could retrieve the arrows as well. That was really cool.
Yeah, and the bow kind of sucks as a weapon because it's a bow. It's not like in other games where they make it like you can always hit like these perfect shots with a bow that one-shot everybody. It definitely, you sense the disparity between that and like a gun, which I really like.
There's a slight kind of arc whenever you shoot
yeah,
it.
you actually have to like account for wind and that. It's
Yeah,
not
and
just like firing off one-shots.
It's not necessarily a one-hit kill like it is in a lot of games, unless they're kind of standing idle. Any other points on gameplay or the sort of visual presentation of the game?
Well, I really like the fact that the environment was sort of what we talked about earlier, the sort of overgrown ruins, lots of lush greenery and that sort of thing. Usually in post-apocalyptic fiction it's just barren, irradiated wastelands like deserts and such. I really like that sort of contrast here.
Yeah, it is sort of unnervingly beautiful, some of these scenes of the doom of mankind, the nature kind of reclaiming these cities.
And as an American, I mean, it was cool to see that the cities were rendered in such realistic detail, with trying to be as representative as possible of what they actually would have looked like if they were in this state of decay.
Yeah, I really love the sort of unbroken feel of your progress through the levels. Unlike, say, something like Uncharted or Mass Effect, where each section is like its own little mission, and then you're kind of globe-trotting all over the world. But here you really get a sense of the scope of the world, and you're progressing in real time. You know, you move from Boston through the sewers, through the city, through the forest, through Billstown, and then there's a bit of a jump where you drive to was it Pittsburgh? So, you know, there is a bit of a jump there, but I think it's earned at that point because you have worked so hard, and then you're making your way through Pittsburgh City. So I really love that style of gameplay, which I think Half-Life uses really well, where it's a sort of an unbroken chain through these levels.
I was just going to say the choice to break it up into 4 distinct sort of bits that I think is a really good way to show the arc. With obviously the winter, spring, summer, and fall, I want to say. That's backwards or totally mixed up. But yeah, I think that was a great way to break it up and to kind of have these distinct mini arcs that all sort of compounded on each other. As opposed to having much smaller like mission sections.
Yeah, there is a sort of thematic resonance to each section. Summer, fall is the decline to Joel's death or possible death, and then winter is this really dark period, especially for Ellie, where the two characters are separated, and before they finally get reunited at the end. Yeah, and I loved how each act ended so abruptly with this really confronting moment, like with you know, that the boy Sam being infected by, or becoming infected and turning into an infected person. I want to say zombie, but they're called infected in the game. And then having to be shot by his older brother, Henry. And then Henry turning the gun on himself, which is a really disturbing moment. But even more disturbing because there is no catharsis, there is no closure. The scene just cuts. And then you immediately jump ahead in time into a completely different location. There is no release. There is no discussion of that moment. It's just, this is the world we live in. It's horrible and grim. And there's no reason or sense to this. Same thing with winter. You get this horrible moment. Yes, it's triumphant because Ellie and Joel are reunited, but it's such a horrible moment. You know, he was too late. He couldn't save Ellie. She gave into this really horrible moment of survivalist impulse. and she's irrevocably changed after that.
That's too small of a grave.
Forgot to leave that stupid robot on his grave. What should I do with it?
Ellie.
What? I want to talk about it.
No.
Why not?
How many times do we need to go over this? Things happen, and we move on.
It's just...
That's enough.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Let's get to Tommy's.
Have you guys played the online multiplayer at all?
No.
Yeah.
I'm not into really online multiplayer with these games. They always kind of feel like it's... I know it's actually supposed to be pretty good, but with games like this, I feel like they're always kind of tacked on to add value to the purchase, which I'm not really a practice I'm not really a fan of.
Peter, have you played
I've played it quite a bit. It's pretty fun, but it does kind of feels separate from the base game. It doesn't really have many of the elements that make them, well, obviously the characters and all that, but it doesn't have any infected in it, and so it just feels kind of like generic TDM. And there's some things that aren't in the base game, like there's 2 rifles that you don't get, and there's silencers for the guns, and it's just doesn't really feel that. It doesn't have that Last of Us feel really, but it's pretty fun. It has maybe a more of a stealth and melee focus than most TDM games, and that way it's interesting. And you have the crafting system as well from the base game.
Yeah, I've played it for like a week or so now. I just bought the pass on a whim, and I'd say it's actually pretty fun. Like, I wouldn't say it's tacked on. I think they've put some genuine effort into creating it. And you're right, it doesn't really feel like the game. Obviously, what makes this game so awesome is its narrative and its characterizations, and the multiplayer obviously doesn't include any of that. It's basically just a combat sort of deathmatch mode. But I think it continues on from a lot of the skills you learn in your confrontations with human soldiers in Pittsburgh, things like that. You know, using the environment, using weapons, crafting things in real time, and sort of a lot of the skills you can sort of carry on from that part of the game into the multiplayer. So in that respect, I think it's really fun, and I think it has some really cool, unique aspects like. As you say, real-time crafting, but also things like the ability to heal sort of downed opponents. If you can get shot a couple of times and you won't necessarily die, you'll just fall down, and then you can crawl around the level for like a minute and some guy can heal you. So it really sort of emphasizes teamwork and working as a team, because you'll have more chance with more people if you sort of heal your teammates. So yeah, I think it creates an interesting dynamic. It emphasizes stealth over run and gun, which games like maybe Call of Duty emphasize more. So yeah, I quite like the variety and the dynamics of the online. But yeah, it's not for everyone, but I think there's some cool elements to it. Katie, have you played the multiplayer at all?
No, but I'll probably give it a shot before I drop this game back off at GameSpot.
Yeah.
If it's a rental, you probably won't have the online pass for it. So.
Oh yeah, you might have the pass. Yeah.
Just to say, I don't think The Last of Us is very high up on the spectrum of offenders with it feeling tacked on, but I just think that that's just like a practice of modern AAA video games that I'm not really a fan of, feeling the need to introduce a multiplayer element to justify the $60. I'd rather have them focus 100% effort, 100% quality of the product on the single player for a game like this, as opposed to a game that is very focused on multiplayer. Like, I would say that like a Call of Duty game, this probably a lot of people would disagree with me, but I don't think that I always get the sense with those games that the single player feels tacked on to the multiplayer experience. And I think that it'd be better served letting go of that entirely.
Yeah, most games tend to emphasize one or the other, and Last of Us definitely emphasizes the single player game. But I think they have put a bit of effort into it, and there's a few unique elements to the online multiplayer which are worth checking out. And maybe you'll like them, maybe you won't, but yeah, it's there if you want it. Okay, so I guess as part of a conclusion, were there any, I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about it, but any sort of criticisms or areas of improvement you can cite about the game?
My general feeling is that this game succeeded in what it was trying to do. It's like one of the greatest AAA titles we've ever seen. But my personal preference lately has been much more into the indie environment, with games that are trying much more seriously to innovate with the way
Right.
that they introduce their gameplay and their story,
Yeah,
as opposed to this kind of standard cover shooter cutscene environment that we see so often. But like I say, AAA games are kind of necessary. They kind of necessarily have to subscribe to that formula right now in the current market, and that's just like a disappointing thing for me.
Yeah, it's a bit like a Christopher Nolan movie or something where it's the best of what it can be, but ultimately what it is this very AAA action adventure where it has to stick to these very sort of safe ways of doing things. It breaks out in certain ways, and it's the best it can possibly be. But as you say, it's not necessarily experimenting the way indie games are. Peter, any criticisms, or Katie rather?
Well, I think I'd let my criticisms be known. I'm so done with post-apocalyptic stories.
Fair enough, yeah.
Zombies. It's like you said, I think this is one of the best representations of the genre in video games. Let's just move on.
Fair enough, yeah.
The thing was, I think they began production before the real big swing of The Walking Dead and all that, so they didn't necessarily anticipate the environment that we're in now. Maybe. Yeah,
they probably started it 4 years ago, so it's not necessarily their fault. But yeah, that's kind of the thing at the moment that's really popular. It's a bit oversaturated, I guess. I think the strongest point of the game is this narrative and this character arcs, these two characters, which is really strong. And it's not just in cutscenes, it is intertwined within the gameplay through dialogue, and you really feel a sense of camaraderie with Ellie and a sense of caring about her and being really interested in these characters and being challenged by a character like Joel, who is so morally ambiguous. But yeah, the gameplay is, I think it's genuinely pretty good. I like the combat systems. I like the cover systems. I would have liked a bit more variety with the enemies, but ultimately I think it does a really good job, and it functions within the story they wanted to tell. We get to explore some really interesting areas. The visuals are great. The music is great. So yeah, I thought it was a really excellent game. So yeah, probably one of my favorite games on the PS3. Any sort of recommendations for people who liked The Last of Us? Any sort of movies or TV shows or games that they should check out? I mean, we sort of cited The Road and Children of Men, but any other recommendations?
Walking Dead by Telltale.
Walking Dead, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good game.
Yeah, well, not
Walking
the
Dead,
show, but
the game.
Yeah. The game, right, yeah.
And not the adaptation from the show, but the Telltale game, the 5 chapters. That's a game that has much longer periods of catharsis and stasis, and it's very much based in the outbreak, and I think has a similar problem with relying on tropes, but does them at least, or it operates in a much more interesting way than I expected when I first got it. And it also has a similar narrative of an older man traveling with a young girl and having to protect her, even though those characters are very, very different from Joel and Ellie. But if you like point-and-click adventure games, it's kind of the height of what you could expect. So pick it up.
And of course, Telltale also released The Wolf Among Us, which is another game in a similar vein. Not zombie, but similar point-and-click style that Telltale Walking Dead has.
Yeah, actually, after playing The Last of Us, I liked it so much that I went back and got all the Uncharted games and played through those as well. And if you sort of like the overall style of The Last of Us, I suppose those are very good as well. Uncharted 2 in particular.
Yeah.
The first one kind of felt a little dated. I mean, it's almost a decade old now, but Uncharted 2 and 3 were pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. Obviously, narratively, wholly different in the way it plays out, but brilliant in its own way, I feel, especially Uncharted 2. I feel like it really is a great representation of the cinematic game style, and it's really fun.
Yeah, I echo that. I think Uncharted 2 and 3, very, very fun games. I think it is using very similar engine than that Uncharted uses. Gorgeous looking games, yeah, really fun. But as you say, very different narrative tone. They're much more sort of Indiana Jones swashbuckling adventures. But yeah, they're great games. I think that about wraps it up. Any DLC predictions?
I believe beyond just multiplayer DLC, I think I could be mixing this up with Bioshock Infinite, but I think they're only releasing one story DLC, if I remember correctly, and it will be not focused on Joel and Ellie. It'll be different characters. So that's what we know so far.
Yeah, this might be one of the few games I actually contemplate buying DLC for it, because I really like the narrative of it, yeah. I think one rumor is it might be the story of Ish, who you get a few glimpses at in the sewer section.
Yeah, I mean, he survived with, was it Sarah, from the sewers, and maybe it was, I mean, we know the story from the sewers, so we probably wouldn't see that, but maybe after that, like, happens. He seemed to be like maybe sort of an anti-Joel character. I mean, he was maybe a little ham-fisted. In the letter, you find that he's like, I have so much faith in humanity, I just got to go on, but yeah, maybe we'll see more of him.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe humans are just ham-fisted by nature. I did quite. There is that, as you say, there is that note. You don't quite know what happened to him. Obviously, the infected got into the area, and you see the really disturbing scenes of the dead bodies of the children. But you finally see that note at the end about him surviving. So it might tell the story of his attempts to set up a community, or it might continue his journey with Sarah and trying to find hope. I think that about wraps things up. Do you guys want to do an after show, or should we just leave it there?
Well, I like your idea of listing our 5 favorite games of the generation, since we're about to, in a couple of weeks, actually enter the new console generation. I like that idea.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess we'll just say goodbye now, and then we can have a little break, and then we can come back for a bit of after-show discussion, if anyone wants to stick around. So, thanks everyone for joining us for a big discussion of The Last of Us. We seem to be pretty positive about the game. I would highly recommend anyone who hasn't played. Hopefully we haven't spoiled the entire game for you, but check it out if you like it, and maybe people who have played it try and think about some of the ideas we've talked about. Thanks everyone for joining me. Thanks Katie, Peter, and Zach. Anything you want to plug before you go? Any upcoming podcasts you're hoping to come onto?
I'm planning a VOK Mass podcast coming up, so
Mass Effect? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I saw that. That looked great, yeah.
I was going to say the same thing, because I know that from the forums that Katie and I guess, have very different opinions on the ending for Mass Effect 3, so I definitely look forward to hashing that one out.
Oh, it should be a good discussion. All right, thanks guys for joining us, and thanks everyone for listening. This has been Vassals of Kingsgrave. We'll see you later. Shall we discuss some after show? Anyone have to go anywhere?
Nope. No, I'm good.
No, not really.
Okay, so the 2 questions I've got on the show notes is, this is kind of coming. This game is kind of coming at the tail end of this console cycle. I mean, we've got the Wii U out and PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One rather are sort of scheduled, I think, for the end of the year. Is that right?
Yes, November. I can't remember the exact dates, but yeah, they're both coming out in November.
So this is definitely one of the last big games of the console cycle, and very much a sort of swan song, I guess, because it is so well loved and well received and considered one of the best games of this gen. So I guess in that vein, maybe do people want to list their top 5 games of this generation? Starting with 2006 and ending in 2013.
Yeah.
Do you want to start, Zach?
Oh God. Okay, I'm not prepared. I would say that these aren't necessarily like the best games ever. I would just list the games that I feel like over that period of time I enjoyed or played the most, and got the most personal satisfaction from. So with that in mind, I would say, and these aren't necessarily all games I played on console because I'm primarily a PC gamer. So I just kind of list in that period that you mentioned. I would start with Halo 3 actually, because I remember distinctly when that game first came out. That was one of the growing up for me, because I'm young. Growing up for me, it was one of the best multiplayer experiences I had with my friends, just coming home every day playing that game so much. So even though it's probably not the greatest game ever, I would list that. Also, StarCraft 2, because I love the multiplayer and the competitive element of that game from the professional scene that has developed around it, and just playing it myself and discovering all the nuances of trying to be the best you possibly can in a very difficult environment. Then for story games, I would list Uncharted 2, because I remember playing that game for the first time and just absolutely falling in love with it, playing the whole thing through in one sitting, and just totally being absorbed by its narrative. And then I would say Bastion by Supergiant Games, which is an indie title that came out, I think, in 2011. It was just a brilliant, really fun game with a new take on how to tell its narrative that I really enjoyed, and I just got sucked up in the gameplay, and I've played it multiple times, and I just really loved it. Oh, God. And then I would say... Oh, this is so hard. There's so many games I've played over this period. I would say it doesn't count. I'll think about the last one. You guys go ahead.
Okay. Do you have any, Peter?
Well, yeah. I'd say probably my favorite game would be Mass Effect 2. Probably really enjoyed that sort of. I mean, I sort of got sucked into the first one as well, but I played them back to back because I got into it a little late. So seeing that sort of progression from the first game, or the combat and such, as the visual style sort of taking a step up, I really loved that game. And probably for second, I'd say The Last of Us. I kind of also fell in love with this game and have played through it several times now, and will definitely stay with me for a long time. And for the third one, probably staying on the BioWare wagon, I'd say Dragon Age Origins. That's also
great.
Kind of it's a more of an acquired taste than Mass Effect games, I guess, especially the combat. It's sort of more tactical and not as visceral. But I really have grown to love it as well. And for the fourth one, well, I like Swords and Dragons, so Skyrim is a good one too. And fifth, maybe Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. I like that, running around Rome and sending people on missions and knifing people. That's nice. Yeah, so that's it for me, I guess.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Katie?
Yeah, I love those games.
Probably my favorite has been Red Dead Redemption. I'm usually not a fan. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Rockstar games. I think as beautiful and detailed and sumptuous as they are, they tend to overstay their welcome. GTA 4 is just a slog and overlong and kind of painful towards the end. But Red Dead is a game that stuck with me the entire time I was playing, and had an ending that really knocked the wind out of me. It stuck with me in a way that I don't think any other game has, really. Skyrim, definitely. I lost about 200 hours of my life to that just within just within the first few weeks of getting it. Mass Effect 3 is probably my favorite out of the trilogy, even though it's definitely, I think, the most problematic of the three games, but I think the emotional highs of that game are, for me, the best in the series.
I agree with you.
And Dragon Age 2, I was not a fan of Origins, but I think maybe it's just, I have a lot of... I'm planning a VOK Dragon Age podcast as well, where I'll probably complain about Origins the whole time. But
and I will argue with you about it.
Like, Origins is fine, but Dragon Age 2, I guess I just like it because it's so much like Mass Effect, and I'm such a BioWare whore anyway that I'll just take whatever they serve up to me. And then I had a hard time thinking of a fifth one, but if I think about the game that I probably spent the most time thinking about and messing around with, Deadly Premonition, which is not a good game at all. It is kind of a turd, but I think that game has a lot of charm to it that shows through how disastrous it is, just as a player experience. It has a crazy vision behind it, and a lot of like, you can tell that there was a lot of love put into it that I think comes through even when it's awful, and it's quite frequently awful. And so those are my top 5.
Okay, great. Well, I guess you and Zach can continue to discuss Mass Effect and Dragon Age on your next podcast. So we've got a couple of video game podcasts on the horizon, I guess.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. It's hard to sort of pin down five. I guess Portal 2 I really enjoyed from 2011. Really funny sort of writing, really great gameplay mechanics. I love the mechanic of the portal gun I find really appealing for some reason, and the physics engine is really fun to play around with. And yeah, just the voice acting of Valve games is just fantastic. Yeah,
Stephen Merchant's hilarious in Portal 2. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I played Half-Life 2 only a couple of years ago and beat that and just loved it. I mean, it doesn't technically count as this generation, but I think, sort of the voice acting in Last of Us is finally catching up to the sort of awesome quality that Valve has been producing for years. Also, I mean, I'm sort of a Nintendo gamer, so I've got a few games from the Wii, which is kind of a bit of the redheaded stepchild of this generation. But I'm a big fan of platformers, so I definitely list Super Mario Galaxy 2, which is just fantastic. Again, like Portal 2, just brilliant gameplay mechanics, just so fun, great physics. Really fun game. Not necessarily dark and brooding like some of the top contenders, but very fun, just on a primal level. Also, if I'm listing the game I've spent the most on, Super Smash Brothers Brawl, which I must have sunk about 200 hours or hundreds and hundreds of hours just playing multiplayer with friends and my brothers. Also, definitely Mass Effect 2, really great game. Like The Last of Us, great characterizations, great narrative. It is quite similar to Last of Us now that I think of it, with the shooting mechanics and all that. Also, finally, The Last of Us. Yeah, I guess I'd list that as my fifth one, and I guess we've talked about that. Yeah, really great game and a sort of brilliant swan song to this generation. I loved it. I guess the other question that I've listed, I don't know if you guys want to talk about it, is will video games be thought of as art or sort of visual texts worthy of critique the way we've talked about The Last of Us this morning, or I guess this evening for you guys?
Well, I think for us, we've shown it is worthy of critique by just the fact that we did. I mean, I don't think that there necessarily has to be some kind of benchmark of justification that games need to leap over this barrier that allows them to be called art. I think that if they have an experience that's memorable and worth talking about and is worthy of consideration and has different opinions about it, then I think there you go with that. And I think that it's already showing that it is well past the necessary benchmark needed to be considered a huge genre of entertainment and appeal. So
I guess
definitely.
This is kind of a conversation that's happening over the past couple of years, and I think it stems from Roger Ebert's article, which kind of criticized games as being, at best, kind of craftsmanship, but never being able to aspire to art in that sense. So that's kind of where I was coming from. I think that the one rub is that it might not necessarily be considered sort of an artistic form of its own. You know, a game like The Last of Us is relying so heavily on cinema, like the tropes of cinema in terms of its cutscenes, in terms of the way it's constructing its story, but which it's doing very well and at a very high standard. And it can be applauded as being artistic in that cinematic sense, but maybe not necessarily succeeding to art in a unique, video game way, I guess. I don't know.
But I think that idea of what is worthy of being called art is such a subjective idea. I mean, art itself is subjective. It can't really be objectively defined as any one thing. So, I would make that argument and also say that obviously you make a point that games are kind of tethered to that cinematic element and this very formulaic model. But I think that, as I mentioned before, that I think that a lot of independent developers are succeeding in really breaking apart those tropes and those trends. And that's also obviously true of other industries where you have some movies that you would consider art house and some that you consider AAA blockbuster. And I think that that's also the case with games.
And I think any genre of anything can learn from each other. Even literature can learn from film, and film can learn from literature. That's not problematic. But as soon as you bring video games into it, I think it's perfectly fine that The Last of Us takes hints from movies definitely. And I'm not quite sure if film should be taking hints from video games, because usually what it takes from video games is not good.
They suck, yeah.
I think what video games often take from cinema is usually a good thing as far as storytelling goes, and I'm always grasping for games to be trying to be more literary, and I think that this game definitely tries to say something, and that's artistic. That's worth doing.
Yeah, I think video games is very much in its infancy in relative terms, so we're not quite sure of what it's going to be, what it's going to evolve into. As you say, every art form derives inspiration from previous art forms. Theatre is deriving from literature. Cinema is deriving from theatre. The first filmmakers didn't have anything to, be inspired by, so they were inspired by theatre. But then you have a whole generation of directors in the 70s who grew up watching movies, so they drew their inspiration from other movies. So every art form, I think, builds upon itself, and we're seeing that kind of cinematic inspiration in video games at this stage. But I think eventually, it will evolve into something of its own. And as Zach says, I don't think there's necessarily art is as exclusionary as some people make it out to be. I think any creative endeavor can be recognized as art, and I think many video games, or all video games arguably, have that creativity and that sort of authorship to be a work of art. Whether it's a piece of good art is up for debate, but I think it has that creativity to be recognized as art.
The real distinction with games is the fact that they're interactive. It's really a wholly new genre or just method of storytelling that we have not seen in any other storytelling method that has existed, and that really presents a lot of interesting challenges and goals to go after with games. And I really look forward to seeing how that develops in the future. Like you say, it's very much in its infancy right now, but I think there's so much room to create amazing experiences, and I look forward again to seeing how it goes.
Definitely. And I think with a game like The Last of Us, it is very shaped and set in its cinematic form. I mean, it's not like there's any room for choice in this game. You ultimately just have to fulfill the actions of Joel. There's the challenge of defeating enemies, but ultimately the story is always going to end up the same way. But with other games like Fallout and Skyrim, you do have that choice, and you do have the ability. Each gamer has the ability to craft their own narrative, and each gamer's experience is going to be different, which I think is a really exciting form of art that is kind of opening up to us now.
Something sort of specific to The Last of Us. It kind of annoys me a lot when I hear people say something like, the game has such a good story that it could be made into a movie, and I'm like, no, it doesn't. The game is the masterpiece. This kind of ties into what you said on the last Korra podcast, Katie, about like how they made the last Airbender movie and see how that turned out.
Lake Loud guy, please.
I don't really like. I mean, people seem to think that getting something on film sort of validates it, but I don't really. That usually just turns out horrible. And as you've said, Duncan, I mean, now the Naughty Dog games usually have pretty high production values, and they're very cinematic themselves, and maybe that's sort of a hybrid thing. I mean, I think they're one of the few studios that actually have motion capture where the actors actually are in the same room instead of just in a booth voicing their lines, and that's kind of interesting.
Definitely, yeah. And I don't think it is necessarily high production values that make art. I think it's that creative impulse, which Naughty Dog has definitely trying to cultivate. They are trying to challenge themselves and challenge narrative tropes. But as Zach says, art house game, or rather independent games, can do exactly the same thing. They've got a lot less money, but they have that freedom to challenge things and experiment with form and try new things. And I think that creative impulse is definitely what makes it art. And
art from adversity, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Art from adversity.
Yeah.
I think you make a really good point about The Last of Us not succeeding in the same way as a movie, because I think that what is so special about that interactivity, even if it's not doesn't have the choice that some games have, is that you feel very much in the shoes, or at least the game is attempting to put you in the shoes of the character. And I think that is a very unique experience that games have over movies.
Yeah, the subjectivity of the player in Joel's eyes is, I think, very effective. As you say, from an objective point of view, he is this monstrous creature, but like a character like Walter White or Tony Soprano, you are so empathetic to his situation and his place in the world that you sympathize with his decisions and you enact them as the player, which I think is really important, and it sort of echoes the relationship between the reader and the character in a novel, or the watcher and a character in a TV show.
If you have an emotional response to it, it's valid.
There you go. That's kind of the point.
There you go.
Yeah. If I think about if I think about like what pop culture has given me emotionally and the most emotional experiences I've had, I mean, my favorite game of the last gen was Shadow of the Colossus, and that had a huge emotional impact on me when I played it, and played it over, at least 50 times. And to me, that validates it as art in my eyes.
Sorry, 50 times you've played it?
It was my favorite game last gen. I would probably play it 50 more if if I didn't stepped on the disc accidentally.
Mine too, probably.
Hopefully it'll be released in the marketplace with PS4.
Yeah, I thought about they re-released it with Ico on PS3, and I thought about picking it up, but there's so many other games that I want to play that I didn't feel compelled to play it anymore.
Well, 50 times I would say is pretty it's a good amount.
I don't know. Yeah, I better pick that up. I don't think I've played that game. It probably hurts my credibility, but yeah, I've been recommended that a lot, so yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little hard to go back. I mean, it's pretty old game now. You don't have the nostalgic classes that we might have.
It's tough though, because there's so many games at the moment that it's tough to sort of justify going back to previous generations to play games. But I guess if a game is good, it's always good. So yeah. Any more comments on the artistic worth of games?
I'd say we pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
I really think that it's a hard thing to define, and it annoys me a little bit every time that a new game comes out that's highly praised, that this question inevitably pops up. It annoys me that people feel the need to ask the question. So I think that if a game, like Katie says, if it's emotional for you, that validates it. There you go. You don't need to reach for this justification of what is valuable about it to find value in it.
Well, I think it's more having the conversation kind of fleshes out, I don't know, video games' place. It's not necessarily arguing, is it or isn't it art? I mean, that's the question, I guess. But it's more, I don't know, what defines art? How do you respond to it? And I guess video games are so formless at this point, what they will develop into. So I guess I think it's a conversation worth having continually, just because, yeah, it's fun to have the conversation.
I won't argue that.
Also, one final point, going back to the sort of interplay between movies and video games, I think, as you say, movies adapted from games are universally terrible. But I think you can see a bit of that gaming DNA in some recent movies. I guess directors growing up playing games have, I guess, starting to put that kind of video game dynamics into their movies. I guess I'm thinking of stuff like District 9 and Scott Pilgrim versus the World, who have that kind of video game mentality, I guess, in their kind of kineticism.
Yeah, I would say that. I think the main reason why I don't think there's a specific issue with games being adapted to movies in like the way they're formed. I think the issue is that a lot of the directors that have had these projects have not taken it seriously, or have not tried to properly adapt in the same way. I guess the argument is that it couldn't necessarily be adapted, like you say, with the Last Airbender movie. I think that if that had been taken more seriously, it could have been good, even though it wasn't animation where the form is best.
Yeah, and also, like The Last of Us, Avatar, The Last Airbender is this, 30-episode season, or however many episodes it is?
Well, it depends. I think it's 58. That's totally a guess.
Or whatever the first season was, I can't remember. But
20 episodes per season.
But like the Last of Us. Last of Us is a 15 to 20 hour game. You're never going to be able to condense that experience into a 2-hour movie. So it's just, The Last of Us that's its form. The game is the story. Any adaptation would just be a lesser version. So yeah, that's my thoughts, I guess. If that's all we have to say, thanks for joining me.
It's good chat.
Yeah, good chat. I'll try
nice chatting with you guys.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Peter, Katie, and Zach for coming on. I'll try and have it edited by within a day or so. I think there's another podcast being sort of recorded this weekend, so it might not be released for a couple of days. But yeah, hopefully it'll be out soon.
Thanks.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Thanks.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So, is everything you were hoping for?
It's got its ups and downs, but you can't deny the view, though.